Jahm bin Safwan and his beliefs. Part 1. Jahm bin Safwan and the Murjiah. Jahm bin Safwan was critiqued by many various Islamic sects, one amongst them being the Murjiah. Now, the Murji'ah were well known for their beliefs that Iman and action were fundamentally separate, and that belief and action do not affect one another. Insofar as if a believer commits a sin, that does not harm his faith, meaning he will not be punished for it, neither will the believer be punished for leaving an obligation that was upon him. And so they used to make this very sharp distinction between action and belief. However, Jahm bin Safwan introduced something entirely new, and that was the idea that belief, Iman, was simply the cognizance or the recognition of the fact that God Almighty exists. And as such, he was very harshly refuted by the Murji'ah. The reality is that the Murji'ah existed before Jahm bin Safwan. As Dr. Yasir Qadi points out in his Maqalat to Jahm bin Safwan, in his book The Statements and Views of Jahm bin Safwan, the Murji'ah as a sect first began to exist during the later half of the first century and existed much before the time of Jahm bin Safwan. And the Murji'ah were very harsh in their refutations of Jahm bin Safwan. For example, take Ibrahim bin Tahman. He is considered from the Murji'ah of the Fuqaha, meaning he is considered from the Sunni jurists who had some elements of Murji'i beliefs. And I'll explain further later on what this exactly means. Ibrahim bin Tahman, it is mentioned regarding him by the likes of Ahmad ibn Hanbal that he was a Murji'i who was severe upon the Jahmiyyah. كان مرجئا شديدا على الجهمية. The statement is recorded by الذهبي in his تذكرة الحفاظ. A very important figure in early Islamic jurisprudence and well respected amongst Muslims worldwide today, Abu Hanifa Nu'man bin Thabit, has a statement recorded from him that, and I quote, "Statements from you," he meant Jahm here, "have reached me that the people of Islam do not say the likes of it." Essentially, he's saying that Jahm bin Safwan introduced such new doctrines that none of the people of Islam before him ever said the like of it. Just to point out, there are various narrations from Abu Hanifa in which he very harshly denounces Jahm bin Safwan. An example of one statement that he makes is the very famous statement of his where he says that two heretical statements have reached us from the east. One was that of Jahm bin Safwan and the other was that of Muqatil bin Sulaiman. This one, meaning Jahm bin Safwan, went to the extreme in negating attributes for God, and the other one, meaning Muqatil, went to the extreme of likening God to the creation, meaning engaging in anthropomorphism. Of course, in all historical fairness and accuracy, we must be careful because many of the details related regarding these figures aren't fully authentic, and in truth, we know very little authentically about these figures. However, it's quite clear to see that early Islamic Sunni polemics, especially, portrayed this caricature or character of Jahm bin Safwan as someone who is very extreme in his denial of God's attributes and in innovating these new philosophical doctrines in the Islamic nation. There's also a good amount of polemical significance for relating these statements from Abu Hanifa, because Abu Hanifa is often criticized by many of the early Ahlul Hadith scholars for going against their methodology in some matters, particularly because he and his school have very strong kalami or rational theology tendencies. And so, essentially, by relating statements critiquing Jahm bin Safwan, it's essentially indirectly trying to demonstrate that Abu Hanifa certainly was not the most extreme figure in this regard, and neither is his school, the Hanafi school, and later on the Maturidi school, which developed in tandem with the Hanafi school. They certainly aren't the most extreme in this regard, and they certainly don't go to the extent that the Jahmiyyah or the Mu'tazila may have gone to. And it's of course important to know that Imam Abu Hanifa, the great Islamic scholar, had a very complicated relationship with rational theology and with sort of philosophy, as did most of the traditionalist scholars that came after him as well. Even though there are narrations from him in which he critiques the study of speculative or rational theology and he does go against it, there are also many narrations where he uses it and he supports it. And it's been mentioned from him that he wrote books in theology, such as Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, and even if there are debates regarding its authenticity, the reality is that these debates are just polemical debates, and in all historical fairness and accurateness, we know for sure that Abu Hanifa did in fact write these works. Anyhow, the scholars of the Salaf, the pious early generations of the Muslims, made a very important distinction between the Murji'ah and the Jahmiyyah. As has already been described, whilst the Murji'ah simply made this very sharp distinction between actions and faith, and they said that sort of actions, bad actions, or that, sort of these, like if a person commits a sin that doesn't harm his faith or that won't lead to his punishment. Jahm bin Safwan, on the other hand, simply said that faith was cognizance or recognition of God's existence. So whilst the Murji'ah, despite not including actions in belief, they still emphasize the importance of belief as a whole. The Jahmiyyah simply said that belief was simply recognition or cognizance of God without any statement or without any action. Fudayl bin Iyad, the famous early Islamic pious scholar, is reported as having said, أهل الإرجاء يقولون الإيمان قول بلا عمل, that the people of al-irja, of the Murji'ah, used to say, the people of the Murji'ah said that belief is statement or holding to certain views without action. وتقول الجهمية, and the Jahmiyyah said that al-iman wal-ma'rifatu bila qawlin wala amalin, that iman, belief, is simply cognizance or recognition of God without statement and without action. And Ahlus Sunnah says, ويقول أهل السنة الإيمان المعرفة والقول والعمل. Ahlus Sunnah includes all of these three. So Orthodox Sunni Islam considered all three of these aspects, meaning ma'rifah, recognition or cognizance of God, and al-qawlu, meaning a statement and testifying to it with the tongue, and amal, meaning action with the limbs. They considered all three of these as part of iman. Waqi' ibn al-Jarrah said that al-Jahmiyatu kuffarun, that the Jahmis are disbelievers. So he went to the extent of excommunicating them. وَعَلِمْتُمْ كَيْفَ كَفَرُوا, and you know how they have disbelieved, meaning according to him their disbelief is so self-evident and obvious. And then he says very interestingly, قَالُوا يُكْفِيكَ الْمَعْرِفَةُ, that they said that cognizance of God's existence is sufficient for you to attain salvation. وَهَذَا كُفْرٌ, and this is disbelief. وَالْمُرْجِئَةُ يَقُولُونَ, and the Murji'ah used to say, and the Murji'ah say, الْإِيمَانُ قَوْلٌ بِلَا عَمْلٍ, Iman is simply statement, meaning holding to belief in God without action, بِلَا فِعْلٍ, وَهَذَا بِدْعَةٌ, and this is an innovation. So it is an innovation and outside of Sunni orthodoxy according to these early pious scholars, but it isn't kufr. So whilst according to these early pious generations of Muslims, of Sunni orthodoxy, although the Jahmiyyah are disbelievers, and this disbelief is very self-evident to them, the Murjiah aren't disbelievers, but they are innovators in the religion of Islam, and they go outside of Sunni orthodoxy.